This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to announce the release of my new book, Obama's True Legacy: How He Transformed America. There's a reason why Mike Huckabee calls it a ferocious and chilling read. Order it now at Amazon.com or at FrontPageMag.com.
Well, good evening, everybody. This is Michael Finch, and you're tuning in to another episode of the Glazov Gang. I want to thank Jamie. I'm subbing for Jamie as the host tonight. It's a very special show and a topic that's near and dear to me, and I think to most of us. And I'll get into that in a second. But first, before I start and introduce our special guest, I want to remind everyone to subscribe on the Glazov Gang. Subscribe to their YouTube and Rumble channels. Visit jamieglazov.com and subscribe to the newsletter. And most importantly, please make a donation to support the Glazov Gang and continue this, be able to have Jamie continue this incredible work that he has with this show. So thank you all for tuning in. And I've got a special guest. I did an episode just 2 weeks ago with a Shulman Fellow of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And that, of course, was Daniel Greenfield. Daniel, of course, is terrific. And we have another special guest tonight who's also a Shulman Fellow of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, a longtime Shulman Fellow, a longtime friend, been with the Freedom Center for, I don't know, Mark, probably about 15 years. But he is a Shulman Fellow focusing on popular culture, which goes right into the topic that we're going to talk about. Mark is also the host of the original podcast on Front Page, The Right Take with Mark Tapson. So I encourage all of you, most of you probably go to Front Page. Jamie, of course, is the editor of Front Page, but please go read Mark Tapson's articles, watch his podcast, and support Mark and the Freedom Center and Front Page. So thank you. And Mark, I want to thank you. We've known each other a long time. We have a lot of concurrent interests. And I think the issue tonight is going to be about the attack on American culture. I just talk about culture, popular culture, and just American culture. And it's a very wide-ranging topic. We're going to try to define it as best as we can in our 40 minutes, but we're not going to be able to, we could probably do a series of shows on the issue of American culture. I think the obvious question I probably don't even need to ask is our culture under attack. I think most of the people that watch the Glazov Gang would say, yes, it obviously is under attack. But I want to ask you, to get your take. I mean, maybe we're making much to do about nothing. I mean, is American culture really under attack? Are we overstating this? What do you think?
Well, first, let me say that it's great to be on with you, Mike. We have known each other a long time, so I'm honored and kind of excited to be here tonight talking about this with you. And especially since I moved away several months ago, we don't get to see each other in person as often. It's great to be across the camera from you.
Yes.
But I will say, though, that Daniel Greenfield is a tough act to follow, so I'm going to do my best here. But yes, is the culture under assault? Absolutely. That's the whole focus of my work. I mean, I often describe it as writing about the intersection of politics and culture, because there's almost no separation anymore. The left long ago eradicated any kind of distinction between politics and culture. They have politicized everything, every aspect of our lives. You know, you think of that 60s and 70s slogan, the personal is the political, and vice versa. That's been their aim, is to politicize every aspect of the culture. And the reason is because the left has known for many decades how critical it is to control the cultural arena. I'm sure you and the listeners are all familiar with the phrase politics flows downstream from culture. And the left recognized this long, long before the right really understood what was happening. And so the left spent literally decades, maybe as far back as the 30s and 40s with the cultural Marxists. They spent literally decades infiltrating all of the arenas of the culture. I'm talking about education, the entertainment arena, of course, the news media. And so now we're at the point where we are now, which is that the left controls all those arenas. The left absolutely controls the culture. Our side talks a lot about the culture war, but we long ago lost that culture war. We're not in a position to be fighting a culture war. It's not like we're two more or less equal armies battling it out for control of the culture. We lost. We're only in a position to be waging a cultural insurgency. The good news is that insurgents very often are successful in taking down the dominant regime and the dominant culture. And I think we've got some momentum going in that respect. But to get back to the main point of your question, is the culture under assault? It has been for many decades. Even though the left controls the culture, they still understand how critical it is, and they still try to enforce control of that arena of entertainment, the news media, and education especially. Like I said, the right is beginning. We've started waking up about that. I think we turned our backs on the culture a long time ago. I know a lot of conservatives who have this typical attitude of, well, who cares what celebrities think? Who cares who Taylor Swift votes for? I've rejected Hollywood. I canceled my Netflix. I don't give Hollywood a dime of my money. And I totally get that attitude. I completely understand that and sympathize with it. But turning our back on the culture or considering it trivial is why we are where we are today.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, excellent. And of course, again, it's great to be with you tonight. The culture is so all encompassing. When we think of, what is culture? In a traditional sense, it's art and literature, music, poetry, architecture, all those kind of, I don't like the term high culture, but maybe that's high culture. And of course, in America today, culture is entertainment, film, television, music, and so forth. But the left has gone well beyond that. You mentioned education and entertainment, but culture is also family and religion. And we see the left's assault really and almost on steroids when it comes to attacking the family and attacking religion, particularly Christianity, of course, but other religions as well. Any kind of religious people are come under assault.
Yeah.
So the left, there really is a plan here. Do you have anything to say, or can you explain why would they go after the family? Why would they go after religion? They've taken over Hollywood. They've taken over so many of the arts. And we'll get into some of those examples in a few minutes, but the family and religion, which is really the basis, the cornerstone of society, has come under special assault. And I think that falls under kind of the culture. Because that really is the backbone of our culture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, this whole cultural assault, this cultural Marxist, rather, assault on our civilization, which sounds like a very grandiose thing to say, but that's really what it is. And that's what's at stake is our civilization. This cultural Marxist assault on our civilization has really targeted three essential pillars of a thriving civilization. And you hit on two of them right away, faith and family. And I would add nation to that also. So faith, family, nation, love of God, love of family, and love of homeland. Our Judeo-Christian values that are wedded to classical Greco-Roman reason, in other words, the marriage of Jerusalem and Athens, as it's called, those values emphasize the worth and dignity of the individual. And it's produced more liberty and equality and prosperity for all than all the collectivist societies in history put together.
Yeah.
And that foundation, faith, family, and nation, which created the greatest civilization in history, that is being destroyed to pave the way for this neo-Marxist agenda to construct a collectivist utopia based on the social justice redistribution of wealth. If I could quickly just go through faith, family,
Yes.
each one of those three to explain how the left is targeting and has been targeting those. Let me start with faith, because I think that's probably the most important. The Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said that all of the terrible things that had befallen his country since the 1917 Communist Revolution were because men had forgotten God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's valid to say that the West today has not only forgotten God, but that we've tried to take God's place. We're in a secular age now of declining traditional faiths. Generation Z, which is I think the youngest generation, is the least religious generation in U.S. history. And when faith declines in a culture, in a civilization, then political religions and a religion of the self fill that void. And that's what's happening. You can see that's what's happening in our culture today. Now, Marxism, of course, is atheistic. Marxism makes a god of mankind and aims to make a heaven on earth in the form of a collectivist utopia. And to do that, the faith in a transcendent authority from whom all of our morality comes, that has to be eradicated. So secular Marxism has gradually and fundamentally transformed America from a nation founded on Judeo-Christian values into one in which this diminishing number of devout Christians and Jews are being demonized and marginalized, as you alluded to earlier, by our cultural elites. The word religion itself comes from the Latin word to bind together. So faith in God really is a force that binds a community, it binds a nation, it binds a civilization together. In fact, it binds the human and the divine as well. And when we would dissolve that bond, when we believe that we and not God are the ones that we have been waiting for, to paraphrase Barack Obama, then society disintegrates into meaninglessness and chaos and a kind of an empty hedonism masquerading as personal freedom. And you can see that all throughout the culture. And let me move on quickly to family. As far as the family goes, Karl Marx explicitly called for the abolition of the family. That's absolutely central to the success of the communist agenda, because Marx viewed the family as a bourgeois, capitalist, patriarchal structure that enslaved women and children and was literally the enemy of the working class. So he claimed that he wanted to dissolve that structure to free women from their domestic slavery so that they could commit themselves to slavery to the state. And it would to turn over the responsibilities of parents, like child rearing, to the collective. So the real reason I think that he wanted to abolish the nuclear family is that it's the most resistant line of defense against a collectivist mindset and against totalitarian state control. And so that's why it's such an obstacle to the communist agenda. I can go a little bit deeper into that, but let me just move on quickly to nation. I don't want to utterly dominate things here with a long lecture, but
the lecture's great, Mark.
Thanks. Patriotism is important also, because patriotism binds you and your fellow countrymen together in a kind of a shared pride in your country's values and achievements and history. It doesn't mean that your country's perfect or that you can't be critical of it, but for Americans, it means that you see your country as an overall force for good in the world. All throughout our history, it means that you recognize that the values and the accomplishments and the actions that have made us great have overall been of service to the world, and they're worth fighting and dying for. When you erode that patriotism, it results in an unwillingness to defend our own values and to defend the country itself. And so obviously you can see that the left has worked very hard to undermine our patriotic sentiment in this country, thanks to their relentless anti-American indoctrination in the educational system, but also through Hollywood and the news media. We once, shared this sense of American exceptionalism that's been replaced by a civilizational guilt and a conviction among our young people that America is exceptional only in the degree of its history of racism and oppression and exploitation. Remember, Barack Obama dismissed American exceptionalism, saying, it's no different from the Greeks or Brits believing in Greek or British exceptionalism. There was a time when that attitude would have appalled Americans, but now there were, by the time Barack Obama said that, there were a lot of Americans, young Americans especially, nodding along with that sentiment. So, that's what has brought us to this brink now. The historian Arnold Toynbee once remarked that civilizations die not by murder, but by suicide. And that's what we are witnessing now, the subversion and the sabotage and the suicide of the West. And that's all come about through the cultural Marxist assault on the culture.
No, excellent. Abraham Lincoln warned us about that we would be defeated from within as well, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting, that to go back, when Barack Obama talked about American exceptionalism, it's interesting that he picked on the Greeks, who the roots of our democracy go back to Greece. So, he could have picked a lot of countries in the world to say our exceptionalism is no different than New Guinea. but he had to pick the Greeks, where so much of what we are as a democracy and as a society come from Greek culture and Greek civilization, Greek culture, right? But you hit on the third, when you talk about national culture, I wanted, that's a great lead in, because I wanted to ask you about that. And then I want to kind of pivot later into some of the specifics, particularly in entertainment. But America does have a national culture. We've had a national culture. And then I give an example of how the left has attacked us. But since the American founding, we've had a national culture, American literature, art, architecture. It all creates this kind of national culture. And the idea of a national culture has come under attack. I mean, everything gets linked with fascism, right? Trump is Hitler, American nationalism that's Nazism. When Hitler wanted to redesign Berlin, he had it was a very brutalist style of classical architecture. He wanted Berlin to look like Rome without the adornment. So it really wasn't, it was kind of I use the term, a bastardization. So I'm not going to praise Hitler for saying that, but there was a part of Hitler, obviously, that embraced classical architecture. The reason why people embrace classical architecture is because it's beautiful. We look at the Greeks and Romans, that's beautiful architecture, right? So, and one of the very specific things that Trump did right before he left office in December of 2020, he signed an executive order saying that all federal buildings would have to follow kind of a neoclassical design, which if you go back to Jefferson's notes, when they designed Washington, D.C., he specifically wanted the buildings to be built in a classical design to give America a culture, saying that these buildings, this architecture would represent the American ideal. The whole idea was a national culture. Maybe the left would call Jefferson a fascist now, but they probably do. Maybe they have. So I shouldn't jump to that conclusion that that's probably happened. But the national culture is very important. And it was interesting when Joe Biden became president, other than opening the border and ending all of Trump's executive orders on immigration, one of the first things he did on day one was he rescinded that order of Trump saying that new federal buildings should be in this kind of classical design. And all the newspapers praised Joe Biden, saying, well, Trump was just following Hitler's example. This is a national culture, and this is fascism. So that's just one example, again, to kind of reiterate your point that and people don't realize that the national culture everything's under attack. So I don't know if you've got anything to say about that before I move on to another point, Mark. But I'm so glad you mentioned because that eroding our national culture and our ideas really is those three pillars, and that's just as important, I think, as the faith and family, or at least right up there. And I'm so happy you mentioned that as one of those three.
Yeah, I do have a couple of quick comments on what you said. One is about nationalism. You're right that it's become kind of a dirty word these days. The left tries to make a Christian nationalists the new boogeyman, and that ties in with the whole collectivist and globalist impulse of the left. They want to erase, this is one of the reasons they want to erase our borders, is they have a globalist collectivist mindset, and therefore a patriotic sense of your own country and your own homeland, that's now Nazism, like you said a moment ago. And another in terms of the beauty, that's another three pillars. They're more transcendent pillars than the ones I mentioned, but another three pillars that the left has undertaken to dissolve are the true, the good, and the beautiful. Those are all values that draw us closer to the divine. This is one of the reasons that the left has undertaken an assault on all those values. There's no universal truth anymore to the left. It's all about my truth and your truth, and there's no transcendent or universal or no agreed upon notion of truth. So that's one of their assaults, is to tear that down. Another is to, as you mentioned, to eradicate beauty, because beauty draws people. It draws people out of themselves. It's our connection, one of our most direct connections to the divine. And this gets back to their atheistic impulses. They want to remove that. And also, just in this, the whole communist impulse is it's very how should I put it? It's a stripped down. It's a very stripped down aesthetics. You described it. I think it's called brutalism, as you mentioned, I think a moment ago. Very stripped down aesthetics, very utilitarian as opposed to beautiful. And so that's part of that's intentional. That's an intentional aesthetics that is in direct contradiction to and conflict with the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Well, perfectly put, Mark. Thank you. And that, yeah, I couldn't have certainly couldn't have said it any better. And beauty, what is art but beauty? And trying to reach the divine, right? I mean, every piece of music that Bach wrote was for God. I mean, and that is the ultimate aim of art and culture, is to try to reach the divine. So thank you for mentioning that as well. I want to kind of pivot in a few seconds and a few minutes to some specifics, and I want to talk about popular culture and entertainment. But first, I think we've come up upon our kind of 20-minute break. So I want to take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow, to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new My Pillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit mypillow.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Michael Finch, and this is a special episode of the Glazov Gang. I want to thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Jamie, for giving me the opportunity to be the sub-host tonight. We have a very special guest, Mark Tapson, a Shulman Fellow of the David Hortz Freedom Center, and we're talking about something which is really in Mark's wheelhouse. He's one of the best, brightest commentators on culture in America today. Mark Tapson is our special guest tonight. We're talking about the left's assault on American culture specifically. And we spent the first half of the show kind of talking about culture in general, national culture. Mark outlined the three pillars of faith, family, and national culture as the three things that are coming under attack. And Mark, I want to pivot because I know this is a special interest of yours. I have a confession. I have not seen the movie Reagan. You have. You wrote a great review at Front Page. Thank you for doing that. And again, when I talked in the first half, we talked about art, literature, poetry, all those. That's kind of what, I guess, high culture in a way, or we think of culture in that way. Increasingly in the 20th and 21st century, American culture has been kind of transported to the entire world, mostly through entertainment, film and television. I mean, that American film has had just profound effects, I think, on the culture all over the world. And I think for a long time, that was a very positive development. And America does not have a ministry of propaganda which tells Hollywood which films to make, right? I mean, Hollywood can make whatever films they want. I mean, it's driven by success. They want to have a lot of people go to the box office and go to these films, and they want to make money. It is a capitalist enterprise. but again, nobody directs them. But there was a time in American history when, without being directed, the great directors and the moguls of Hollywood, they didn't follow any kind of propaganda, but they would make movies that showed America in a very different light than what movies do today, in a positive light. America was an example, the shining, city on the hill, and they showed that in movies and film to the world. I don't know. We talked about the 1960s. Peter Collier and David Horowitz call it the destructive generation, and I think many of the things we talk about in the destruction of culture happened during the 1960s. But I think with Hollywood, it goes, with a lot of these things, it goes further back, before the 1960s. Can you kind of give us an idea of, I don't know what happened in Hollywood, when this changed? Maybe that was part of the overall development of the attack on culture that we're talking about tonight. But what happened to Hollywood? I guess that's just to kind of open this conversation.
Well, that's a good question. There was a time, as you were suggesting, that when Hollywood basically reflected American values, and it essentially put out family entertainment. Gradually over the decades, and especially in the 60s and 70s, I hate to blame everything on the 60s, but that really was a turning point. Yes, it did start somewhat before the 60s. This kind of cultural Marxist infiltration of entertainment. But it's mostly in the 60s and 70s where it really hit, and where Hollywood began to focus on entertainment for young people as opposed to families. And I think that's because they understood that young people are the most easily indoctrinated. They have these malleable, impressionable young minds, and they tend to be idealistic. And so it's easy to sort of grab hold of young people and turn them into social justice activists. But that's what happened to Hollywood. Is essentially it was taken over by radicals, left-wing radicals, who began to produce what I would call transgressive art. Art that began to not uphold the kinds of American values that we valued before then, but to smash those pillars, to blow a hole through those values, and to push the envelope. That became kind of the catchphrase, or the motive behind a lot of movie making, was just to push the envelope. There seemed to be no legitimate reason for that except to be transgressive for its own sake. But it's essentially brought us to a point today where so much entertainment is not only is it not remotely family friendly, but it's what I would call literally satanic. I know a lot of people have canceled their Netflix account. I have not, because it's part of my job to watch Netflix so that you don't have to. And I can tell you, I see a lot of disturbing stuff on there, and not to mention children's programming, which is a whole other level of demonic activity. But it's been such a disturbing transformation over the course of just a few decades. But as I said, there was a time when Hollywood was more or less upholding these values that helped make us great, and that helped make Western civilization great. And then it began to just fragment and quickly to dissolve. And mostly in the 60s and 70s, with a lot of radical directors, a lot of visionaries who wanted to, as I said, push this envelope. And once you start pushing the envelope, if that's your impulse, you don't ever go back. You just keep pushing the envelope. So I've seen things that I wish that I had never seen, and that 30, 40 years ago would have been unimaginable. That's popular entertainment now directed at young people. So it's Hollywood's transformation of our culture. I mean, they've been at the forefront, of course, of the transformation of culture, and not just here, but as you suggested, around the world, because we export that culture. The high culture that we were talking about earlier, unfortunately, young people today know, and I'm speaking very generally, of course, they know next to nothing about that high culture. If they have the vaguest notion of it, they reject it as the exploitative output of quote unquote dead white males. And so it's all irrelevant, and it's part of a culture, that part of a Western civilization that our young people are rejecting now. The only culture that they're familiar with, and certainly that they care about, is pop culture. And that's what American culture has become. It has become pop culture. And there's a lot of good in pop culture. I mean, there's, we can all point to shows that have helped shaped us, some for better and some for worse. But we're all kind of children of pop culture now. That's grown up since about 1962, and there is some good in that. There's a lot of good to point to, but overall, it's been it's gone a long way toward pulling down that high culture. It's gone a long way toward fragmenting our society, driving a wedge between younger generations and older generations, and just dissolving our religious faith and our national, as we were talking about earlier, our patriotism and our faith and the family structure. It's been a destructive force overall. The upside of this, or the good news, is that we're beginning to see a change. We're beginning to see conservatives who understand, okay, that we've got to get involved in pop culture. We've got to get engaged in that arena, and we have to start creating content. We can't just sit back and whine about Hollywood or turn off Netflix. We've got to get in the culture, and so that's starting to happen. It's a little rough going at this point because we're still in the process of creating our own production companies and our own distribution networks and things like that, because we're simply shut out of the larger, Hollywood networks and things like that. We're simply ignored or shut out. So we're kind of creating our own distribution unit. We're kind of creating a parallel culture, essentially. And I think that's what it's going to take to push back against the dominant culture, is to create cultural content by us and for us. That's something that reflects our values, something we can watch. Families can sit down and watch where we don't feel like there's a political sucker punch coming. All that stuff is incredibly necessary, I think, for conservatives to feel like we're back in the game and that we're restoring some kind of something of the America that we used to know.
Yeah. Well, Mark, your comments there lead me into so many other questions that I want to ask you, and I know we're going to run out of time. But one thing I want to implore conservatives. Conservatives are great at stressing that children need to learn, the Constitution, the Declaration, the Gettysburg Address, and read the Federalist Papers. And obviously, all of that is incredible. It's critical for the survival of our republic. But we also need to. You had mentioned just American high culture, the great artists, the landscape artists of the 19th century, the poets and writers, the architects. They built an incredible American culture, which is not taught. I mean, most of what I've learned about American culture, I've learned later in life. I did not learn in school, even in college. So we need to stress that America does have an incredibly beautiful culture. That really, painted this canvas of what America is, and we don't study that at all. So conservatives, I would implore all of us to stress that part of our culture is taught in the schools, not just the political papers and the Declaration. And I'm not diminishing those. Obviously, those are incredibly important as well. And you mentioned another point about kind of entertainment, and I want to stress that in our kind of final time, because I think, we're seeing higher education, it could be like the bubble that's going to burst, because we're seeing percolating a lot of alternative universities. Some of it's online, not all of it. And we're seeing, you and I have had these conversations, and you look at entities like the Daily Wire, and there's a lot of writers and creators outside of Hollywood that are creating, as you've mentioned, kind of this alternative kind of culture. We are the counterculture, which is kind of ironic now, but that's where the side that we're on. Can you speak a little bit about, because when this thing falls, when the higher education system, which is incredibly corrupt, actually the entire education system, K-12 all the way through the universities, is incredibly broken and corrupt and doing great damage to the children and the youth of this country. When that bursts, it's going to fall suddenly, kind of like the Berlin Wall. And let's focus on education is a different topic for another evening. But on entertainment, are we ready? Is the talent and everything out there to take advantage? Because you talked about what Hollywood's done since the 60s and 70s. it's still a profit-making enterprise. You have to make money. And a lot of this entertainment is not, these movies are not making money. The ones that make money, we talked about, George Clooney makes a movie called The Boys in the Boat. George Clooney's the left-wing Joe Biden, Barack Obama supporter. He makes a wholesome American movie about the University of Washington writers in the early part of the 20th century. And it's a great seller. People wanted to go see that. You would think that Hollywood would understand that and make more movies built upon kind of the American ideal, wholesomeness and family and faith, but they haven't learned. So I'll skip to the question. Sorry about that, but I'll skip to the question. Are we ready to kind of take over? Because Hollywood's going to collapse at some point. This cannot last. Are we ready to take back the culture in the entertainment sphere?
That's a good question. I think we're. Oh, are we ready? I have to think about that. Are we ready? You're right about that. It's like the Hemingway character describing how he went bankrupt is gradually and then suddenly. You may be right about that Hollywood's going to collapse rather suddenly. Let me just address something real quickly, and that's that
Sure.
Part of the reason Hollywood keeps making these movies that fail is that Hollywood is not, well, there are a lot of Hollywood elites, let's put it that way, who are just simply not making movies for Americans. They're making movies for each other, for their friends, and for their comrades, and their ideological buddies. And they don't really care if those movies fail. They figure, it'll make the money back in the long run via video or whatever. But they just want to push their ideology. And also there's the international market. I mean, Hollywood has been, 2/3, if not more, of the money that Hollywood makes comes from abroad and largely from China. So increasingly Hollywood has just abandoned American audiences and looked to the international market. And so there is this underserved American audience that is incredibly hungry for good movies like the kind that conservative filmmakers are starting to make, like The Sound of Freedom, for example, that recent film, or the Daily Wire documentary, What is a Woman? I mean, those things are making money hands over fist. And that's because there's this underserved audience that craves that. I think there are a lot of creative conservatives out there who are ready to jump into the fray and to just get going. That they just need the support. They need the logistical and financial and economic support of moneyed conservatives. Moneyed conservatives, it's very difficult to get them to understand the significance of the culture. They keep wanting to pour money into politicians or into think tanks. It's very difficult to get them to understand and to commit to a film project, because films, they're very risky financially. So I get that. I get why they don't want to, but it's very important that these moneyed conservatives get behind filmmakers who are capable of producing some amazing art if they just can get the backing. Right now, there is some amazing art going on with little or no budget for filmmaking.
Right.
So imagine what we could do if we had a lot more funding.
Yeah, it takes more than winning an election, right? We're not going to win back the culture by winning just elections. I mean, I understand the money that goes into politics, but I wish we could talk more about the influence China's had on Hollywood, which is, I think, tremendous. It's amazing. Another incredibly popular movie, maybe the best movie or best money-making movie, was Top Gun, and the second one, and how Tom Cruise was able to keep that Taiwan flag on the back of his jacket under probably incredible Chinese influence is really remarkable. But that's proof that you're right. There is hope. I mean, good films are being kind of snuck through. I mean, I used to like the Marvel films. They are completely unwatchable. They've gone completely. I can't stand maybe 10 minutes of a Marvel film. The action films were kind of the last kind of holdout, but we've even lost those. And you're right. Maybe those are being made for an international audience, or they don't care about the money. They're going to be woke. And we're just going to have to suffer. But I'm hopeful, as I think there's a lot of people getting ready to build this alternative universe in education. You're right, there is a lot of talent out there, and it's below the surface, and I don't know where it is, but I hear a lot of stories, and you see the kind of these things bubbling up, that there really is some great filmmakers out there. that when Hollywood finally does kind of fall, which I think it will, I have the confidence that with your help and many others, I think Hollywood, this will be the alternative Hollywood, because the market's there, right? I mean, more than half the country, even part of that other half that votes against conservatives, I think wants at some level wholesome family faith, and they want that kind of. I don't believe that half of the country hates those kind of movies. I just don't believe that. So, anything else before we kind of wrap up, Mark? Is there anything else that you could add or want to add about what we can do as citizens? Besides canceling Netflix, which a lot of us, I'm with you. There's certain shows that I like to watch. Plus, you like to keep a kind of a view on what the enemy is doing, right? So I'm sorry you have to endure all that for us and write the reviews. But is there anything else as citizens that we can do other than maybe just reclaiming those forgotten parts of our culture? But what can Americans do?
Yeah, it's very difficult for the average American citizen to move the needle of the culture unless he or she owns a movie studio or a publishing company. It's hard to do that. So I think a lot of just ordinary Americans don't know what to do or think that there's nothing that they can do. There are a few things. The first thing, just in terms of pushing back against the cultural Marxist assault on our civilization, the absolute first thing that everybody can do, but this is no small thing, is tell the truth. Speak up, stand up, and tell the truth against the left's lies, against the cultural Marxist lies about gender and about God and all of these left-wing ideological notions that they're pushing. Stand up and speak the truth. That's no small thing, because you can lose friends, you can lose relatives, you can lose jobs. Cancel culture is a serious thing, but courage is contagious. And if you stand up, you will find other people standing up at your shoulder. And that's what it's going to take on the most basic level, is tell the truth. Another thing that people can do more politically is look for politicians who understand the culture war and vote for those people. It's not enough anymore for politicians to just champion the free market or talk about low taxes. You've got to get someone like a Ron DeSantis who understands that the cultural arena is where the real battle is taking place and knows how to get in there and is willing to fight on that level. So look for those politicians to vote for. Trump is another one like that, but I think Ron DeSantis is really effective in that arena. And on a cultural level, reject things like, reject the kinds of entertainment. First of all, educate yourself about what's going on out there. You don't turn your back on it. Educate yourself about what your children are being shown, and push back against that at school board meetings, or write, to production companies or studios and tell them to take this demonic, gender ideology off the air. You're going to have to get active on that level. And on a spiritual level, I would say recognize that we're in the midst of great spiritual warfare and put on the full armor of God. And so that's what I would tell the average person that he or she can do.
Thank you, Mark. Well, this has been a real treat for me. Thank you, and an honor to be able to interview you and talk about.
Me too, Mike.
I think something that is so critical. I want to remind our audience, please visit frontpagemag.com, where you can read Mark Tapson and many others, but you can read Mark, listen to his podcast, hopefully soon watch his podcast. But his podcast, The Right Take, again, is at Front Page. And again, a thank you again to Jamie Glazov. Please be a regular viewer of the Glazov Gang. Support the Freedom Center, and also go to Jamie Glazov's website, and please donate and support the Glazov Gang so we can continue to run episodes like this. So, Mark, I want to thank you and thank the audience again for tuning in tonight. This has been a great episode and a real honor again to be with you, Mark.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks a lot.